So, not but 2 minutes ago,
Mm-hmm.
you were telling me about this bloop and
Yes.
how the assumption was that it was some kind of creature.
Well, I mean, there was never a significant scientific consensus that it was a creature. It was that they released a sound, someone heard it, and said this must be the sound of a creature, and then they built a mythology behind it for fun because it's the internet.
I mean, that part of it is cool.
Mm-hmm.
Totally cool with that.
Sure.
Um, but the first part, the part about there not being a scientific consensus on it,
Yeah.
is going to be very important to what I would like to talk about next.
Okay.
You don't know what it is yet because I haven't told you. You don't know what the content is of what we're recording right now, correct?
Nope. We are half blind.
Well, I mean, this is sort of a half blind, but it's really just going to.
No, we're not reviewing anything. I just wanted to use the term.
You think we're not reviewing anything?
Uh oh.
All right, I've definitely confirmed, at least with some shred of evidence to the listening audience, that you do not know what I'm here to talk about beforehand.
I
So if
do
we take
not.
that as a given, this is where things are going to get fun.
Okay.
The three-body problem is the single most written for a Netflix adaptation book I have ever read.
Three body problem. Okay. So this is a book.
This is a book.
I've heard of it actually.
I have too for a very long time. People have been
Uh huh.
telling me that it's a great book. It's a wonderful science fiction book. I'm not going
Uh
to
huh.
say it's a terrible book. I'm not going to say it's even a bad book. I'm just going to say that as I actually listened to the audiobook, which did not help at all because that only makes it more obvious,
Uh huh.
but it is someone sat down and said, "How do I write something to get picked up on Netflix?" And this was the strongest result that I've seen in that category thus far. By the
Okay.
way, it's getting picked up for Netflix.
Of course.
Yeah. Um I and honestly, I don't know where to start with this one because I'm going to spoil the whole story, which doesn't
Okay.
matter because it's not. There's a lot that happens in the book, not that much story to it. I'm guessing that if, let's see, it was about a 13-hour listen, so it was probably at least maybe a 400-page book, close to that.
Okay. All
Uh,
right.
so particularly long, but not a lot of substance for the main like the main story could have been summed up in a very short story, possibly like a, you know, 15 to 30,000 word novella.
But
It,
but but short stories are far less profitable.
well, they're far less Netflixable,
Also,
really.
yes.
Um,
Yes.
and this is where the problem that I have with a lot of modern writing comes in. None of it is written
Okay.
to entertain someone that's reading a book. I have come across so many books recently where it's like the idea is a good idea, but the way it's
Yeah.
presented is so obviously meant for you to be binge watching Netflix that trying to put it in reading format is the most mundane process I can possibly imagine.
I mean, like, what? So, what's the difference between a book that's just say separated into chapters and a book that's designed to be put into Netflix?
A book that's designed to be put into Netflix has to do several things because you're going to have an episodic presentation that's going to have an underlying storyline, but also needs to have some kind of event or background presented in each episode. The
Okay.
biggest problem that I have with that, and that I think a lot of people have, which is why I think a lot of Netflix shows aren't doing as well as when Netflix first started,
Uh huh.
is that you will have an episode of something. It will
Okay.
be a story that maybe the first episode you're like, "Oh, this is really interesting." And maybe even the second episode, maybe if you're
All
lucky.
right. Sure. Sure.
But in a very short span of time, you find that you haven't just been thrown into the perspective of different characters whose backgrounds also need to fill time until they can get to the main plot of the story. You're also completely taken away from the other set of characters. Now, this has been done in
Um.
books before, since way before
Sure.
Netflix.
Well,
But
I
when you,
mean, I could. I mean, the Grapes of Wrath does it.
Yeah, yeah, lots of books have done it before. The
Sure.
difference seems to be that you never have much payoff for what happens in these jumps when it comes to the final part of the story.
I see.
So so this particular book, and, you're picking up this book and you're reading the back of the cover and you're like, "Ooh, this sounds like a science fiction story." I'm
Yes.
just gonna go ahead and spoil one big thing right now.
I
Not
mean,
un
we're gonna spoil the whole thing, but sure,
Yes,
go ahead.
eventually, but not unlike every single Netflix show that comes out anymore. This is a detective story with a sci-fi veneer, but it's probably the worst way of doing it because it's not even really a detective story. There's a
Okay.
lot of detectiving that goes on. There's a lot of characters that are presented. Funnily enough, one of the characters that's in it for the shortest amount of time is the most interesting, useful, and best character. Everyone else is this blob, which
Uh
I
huh.
kind of wanted to forgive it at first because it's like, okay, this is a Chinese written book by someone who is it seems like they're making fun of the Communist Party a lot in this book and the things that they did that kind of ruined, individuality basically, and the reason
Okay.
that that doesn't help to prevent things like warring nations and all this other stuff. Lot of philosophy in
Etc.
in the book that is presented in ways that some people might think is really deep, but really it's just like, no, this is thoughts people have had, like just, sitting down and watching the news. It's like, oh, maybe we should or shouldn't do this. That's just really basic stuff.
They're beer thoughts.
Yeah, these are beer thoughts.
Okay.
Um, it's kind of shrouded in the mysticism of physics, so that it doesn't seem like it's beer thoughts.
No, stop. I am a physicist, and
I
I take offense to your statement of the mysticism of physics.
Well, that's
What
because
does
you're
that
not
mean? What do you
understanding
mean
where
by
I'm
that?
where I'm coming from. So we'll explain that real quick.
Yeah,
There's
yeah. Let's
there are
explain.
things in it that are actual physics, and then there are things that are either not physics or are physics but have not been fleshed out to the scientific and technological level that the book wants to present them in. So the person that
Okay.
wrote it obviously likes mathematics a lot. That becomes very. I mean, the book is called The Three Body Problem, so
Yeah.
immediately you have that going for you.
Solve numerically.
Yeah. So what the book I'll jump ahead a bit. I'm going to give you the first part first, so I'm not like completely, just getting right to the sci-fi part, which is the only real interesting part of the book.
Okay.
There's like little parts at the beginnings and, following some of the other characters that are kind of interesting, but really you're just seeing a lot of government mishaps and people making uh, stupid mistakes and people trying to figure out what's going on in a world gone mad. Now, remember specifically the thing you said
Okay.
about scientists not coming to a consensus that the bloop noise was some creature. That's important.
Sure.
That's very
Okay.
important to what happens in this book because what happens in this book is I don't want to say that it's like there's this grand plan that happens near the end of the book. You find out exactly what's going on. You can kind of predict it if you're really thinking about it, but
Okay.
basically there's this grand plan that explains a lot of the things that happen earlier in the books in the book, and you're like, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. But at the same token, once you realize it, you're like, this shouldn't have worked at all. Like,
Huh.
certainly not on the level that it's like the exact reverse of what should have happened, and it just happened. But let's get back to the beginning because a lot of the story revolves around people who are scientists. And in the beginning, there's one that's she's an okay scientist. They kind of
Okay.
explain that
Sure.
as the story goes along, she's not the greatest scientist. And God help me if I try to remember their names. They're all Chinese names, so they're not that easy for someone who speaks English to remember.
Okay.
Uh,
Or pronounce.
Yeah, yeah, despite the fact that I was listening to an audiobook, but still there's like so
Yep.
many repeats of names that it's impossible for me to remember who was who. Uh, the only one that I can remember is, of course, the best character in the book. I'm just going to go ahead and say that that's objective. I don't even care. But there's a detective Shu in the book, and maybe
Okay.
that might be one reason his name is easy to remember because it sounds like Shu. Another reason
Yeah.
is because they call him something like Big Shoe or something. They gave him a nickname, and so it kind of just stuck with me that oh, that's the
No,
character they're talking about.
but Big Shoe,
Yeah, yeah.
not like Gumshoe.
No, no, not Gumshoe. He's not that kind of detective. That's not what makes him cool. He's basically like a hard-boiled detective character, but he does the most interesting thing in the story.
Okay.
But getting back to the first character, she's some kind of astrophysicist, and her father was outspoken against the Cultural Revolution. They were using the historical Red Revolution of the time, and her
Okay.
father was killed during this revolution, and basically she has a chip on her shoulder about that. But she goes to work with some people, and there's this like semi 1984 thing that happens where she's working with they're cutting down trees on this hill near a military complex, and there is
Okay.
like this secret ultimate ulterior motive that her and a bunch of other rebels have where they're trying to basically make this place where they're working their own stronghold, and they're going to take it over at some point. Never
Okay.
happens, not important to the story, but it's kind of important to know that she has that rebel mindset. Uh,
Okay.
so she comes across someone who slips her a book from Europe or some I can't remember the name of the book. It's a famous book that I never read. Uh,
About what?
I can't remember. They mention it a couple times. It's not too important to know what it was, I guess. But it's a book I never read, so I'm not going to remember it here. Point is,
Wait. Okay. Go ahead.
well, it's like like in Fahrenheit 451, people are handing people old books and they're not supposed to. That's basically what happened here. She got
Sure. Okay.
she met a guy who was like, yeah, here's this book, and it had influenced him, and he was like, we're cutting down way too many trees in this area. There's a lot of that, by the way. A lot of the book is life is precious, Buddhism, yada yada yada. We're cutting down too many
Uh huh.
trees. I'm going to send a letter to the government and ask them to stop. He sends the letter,
Okay.
but he had her transcribe it because he couldn't write. He couldn't write it out that well. He wasn't educated enough or something. I don't know. That doesn't even make sense because I think he was a reporter. But he had her write the letter for him, and he
Uh
sends it
huh.
to them, and he never signed it, which means that they come looking for her, and he freaks out. And since he's actually in the administration at the time, like he wasn't intentionally trying to frame her, but he frames
Uh
her,
huh.
and so they take her
Accidentally.
and they throw her in the brig. And at some point, it becomes obvious that they're probably going to just leave her in prison to die. But then
Uh huh.
something happens where she just like wakes up and she's being treated medically, and they're transporting her in a helicopter to the base that was at the top of this mountain where they were cutting down the trees, and they need her
Okay.
help with a lot of technical stuff. And she gets there,
Okay.
and she realizes that she is not the most savvy of the people there, but a lot of the people there are trying not to show that they're very good because they're hoping to get transferred out. So she
Uh
basically
huh.
becomes the de facto head of everything. And
She does.
yes,
Okay.
and this is a very important part of the story, but they take you through, a good portion of the book is the setup for this. And then they get away from her completely and go to a totally different character. And that character is also, I think his name was, he was Professor Wong, and
Okay.
he was doing some research on nanomaterials. And at some point,
Fine.
this crazy thing starts to happen where every time he takes a photo with a camera, he's seeing these numbers. And it's like developing these numbers are anytime he takes a picture of something and
Okay.
develops the film, he's getting these numbers that are imprinted on the pictures he takes. And then it gets
When does
weirder.
this take place? When does this book take place?
Well, it takes place in several different times. It's like the 1960s, and then it's like the 1980s, and then it's in the modern era. It's jumping around a bit. depending on,
Okay, so he is using a film camera at this point.
Well, he's actually in the digital age at this point, but he likes old cameras. He's messing around with them, and this is happening on film
Okay.
because he tries to do this with digital cameras and realizes that it's happening on digital cameras too. But the weird thing about it is that he's
Uh huh.
going around to various people he knows and having them take pictures. It's only happening when he takes pictures. And
That sounds strange, but okay.
it is strange, and it's like at this point in the story, I'm like, okay, this is something weird that I can get into. Let's see where this goes. You know, spoiler alert, they do not tell you until the end of the book what's happening, although by the end of the book, you can kind of guess what's happening, and then they over explain what is happening, and you're just like, all right, I get it. I know what they did. Can we just move on from this?
Uh huh.
It's possible that them over explaining at the end of the book what happened is set up for something that happens in a later book. I don't know. I don't really plan on reading the later books because this one,
It's a series, isn't it?
it is a series.
Yeah.
The
So
first book tells an entire part of what seems to be a much larger saga, which I'm guessing. I'm just guessing. I don't know this, but I think the first book is not going to have much to do at all other than being set up for the second book, which I will guess is going to be set up for completely different characters in the third book or whatever, however many there are, because
hmm
what ultimately becomes the problem of the book is that humanity learns that there is a race of aliens that is living on a planet that they they basically can't save their own planet, and they're going to come to Earth and conquer Earth and probably wipe out all of humanity. And so a time
Okay.
limit is set at some point in the book where it's like humanity basically has 450 years to figure something out.
Okay. Sure.
Uh, Now, there is one really interesting thing about the book, which I feel like I've seen before in another story, but I can't remember what it is. But we'll save that for
Uh
the
huh.
end
Okay.
because it's basically the big thing where it's like, okay, so this is the problem that they don't solve in the book, and we're assuming has to be solved in the next book. Like I said, it's written for Netflix. You can feel the end of a season on Netflix when you finish this book.
Uh huh.
So this professor is trying to figure out what's going on with these numbers, and this is where the characters start to do things where I don't know if I'm missing something in the cultural translation of how a Chinese person would react to this or not.
Uh
I
huh.
don't feel I am. I don't feel like a lot of what happened was rational here. Uh,
Okay.
there are some parts where I can say, okay, you can say he's making a leap of logic where all these things are connected, but it seems like he's wasting his time in a lot of cases. And then time moves really fast for other things that I'll explain in a minute. But basically,
Okay.
what happens is he goes to this person that he respects and says, I don't know what's going on. Can you give me a hand? And they give him non information. Um,
Non-information.
well, actually, I should jump back and say that he gets found by this group of people that are meeting up for some military reason. And he's invited by this detective to go and sit in with them.
Okay.
Uh, and the reason they give him is because he's working on these nanomaterials. And then he gets
I
there.
mean, sure. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And he gets there. He realizes that all these scientists are apparently committing suicide, which is the part of the book where I kind of raised a finger and was like, hang on a second, this isn't what would
Uh
happen, but
huh.
we'll get to that.
Okay.
And I feel like whoever wrote the book seemed to present things out of order because he gave away things before they became questions.
Oh,
So
that's
I'm actually going to
wow.
change the
Okay.
order a bit so that uh, it kind of follows a more mysterious storyline.
All right.
He leaves this meeting where he's kind of confused that there's representatives from NATO and the CIA and all these other organizations, including a police detective from a community in the local area.
Question mark.
Exactly. And they had kind of given him this mission that he sort of half agreed to help find out what's going on with this organization called Frontier something. I don't know. I nothing.
Twilight Frontier.
What?
Twilight Frontier.
Yeah, we'll call it Twilight Frontier, sure. But it's got Frontier in the name somewhere. So he goes and he's not actively trying to help these people because they kind of rubbed him the wrong way, but he is
Okay.
interested in what's going on. And one of the people that he runs into, trying to get information about this, is someone that is in this organization, and he's asking for advice uh, on this number thing that keeps because like now he's seeing these numbers in his eyes. They're like in his vision, and she tells him to stop his experiment, which immediately would raise a lot of questions. But this character, for some reason, is just like not interested in asking these questions. He's just like, well, I can't stop these experiments. Even if I stop them, someone else is going to do them. Uh,
Yeah.
and then she's like, well, you could, I mean, just stop it for now. Find a reason. And which he does. A reason crops up where he's like, okay, well, we need to repair this. Let's stop it for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happens, these numbers disappear. Now, keep in mind that these numbers were representing a countdown. He
Oh,
noticed while
okay.
by looking at the films he took on the digital cameras and correlating them to the time on the cameras that it was counting down.
All right.
And that's one of the things where it's like there's a whole Netflix episode right there where it's just him trying to figure out what these numbers mean, and he's suspicious that it's a countdown. And a whole episode on Netflix would just be him confirming his suspicion.
Okay.
So now he's got this information, and while he was there, completely coincidentally, he saw her playing this game on a VR thing called Three Body.
Mm-hmm.
And he manages to find a similar VR thing in his lab and decides to check this thing out. Now they
Okay.
really start to fast track him just solving things without actually having any information. Where he gets into this game, and the purpose of the game, he joins and he meets these people in the game. Some of them are computer programs, some of them are actual other people playing the game.
Okay.
And they're talking about traveling to see this emperor. And he starts talking about, well, shouldn't we wait till the sun rises? It's cold. These VR suits that he's using, they can simulate cold and everything, and so you can kind of tell what the temperature is supposed to be. Uh,
Okay. I mean, okay. I guess.
it's just one of them things where it's like, here's some technology to make this story work, so let's just run with it. It seems like it's supposed to be. I'm sure they gave a year, but it'd roughly be in like probably the 2015-ish something or other, a time when we have virtual reality, and they just upped the technology a little.
Okay. Fine. I mean, it seems kind of like a waste of. I don't know. This. It seems like it's meandering a lot.
It's very meandering, and I feel like the VR thing only exists to add a few more episodes where they can just hang out in the VR world instead of in the real world. You'll also note if you actually read or listen to the book that there's a lot of material where it's just like, oh, okay, they could have been doing something expensive here, but this seems like an excuse to not have a big budget for this episode on Netflix.
Yeah.
Just like more and more as I go through the book, it's just like, oh, they did this because it would be easy to do this on Netflix. So so there's a couple of mysteries that get solved. One of them is actually they are in a world where it's explained to him that, well, they can't actually go at night. They don't know when night will be because the sun is never in the sky. The sun appears at random times, and they call it a chaotic era. And during the chaotic
Oh,
era, nobody can predict when there's going to be sunsets,
uh,
sunrises, what the temperatures are going to be. And he finds out that they're in this world where the people, the players can dehydrate themselves and be stored away so that they can come back in a non-chaotic era, or at least a chaotic era where they can try to solve a problem. And
but
go on.
well, I mean, this whole thing sounds like. Okay, so there's a VR game where the player plays as a person in a chaotic world where the goal is to like go into suspended animation to end up in a world where things make sense as opposed to just stopping playing the game.
Oh, okay, so time in the game is actually increased for the purpose of, uh, getting to new eras.
Yeah, fine, but whatever.
But yes,
Why would you? Yeah, okay. I mean, the whole thing seems like it's there just to waste time.
it it's one of the problems that the show has where like it never really explains just why people get interested in this thing. In fact, there's one scene in the book where there's people sitting around talking about why they're interested in it, and none of it really makes sense because it's just like, oh, it's so much better than the real world, it's so much more interesting, and it's the least interesting world. Other than the fact that there's
Yeah,
complete chaos randomly, it's the least interesting world. I couldn't stand the parts of the book where they were in that world. I was just like, move on, please, get back to the story. Now this
yeah. It
VR,
sounds like really pointless.
it's not completely pointless. The VR part itself plays a bit of a role in getting you ready for what they're going to do with the actual story that's unfolding. Uh,
Great. Okay, fine.
so he's in this world, and people have been playing it for a while, and uh, they're trying to figure out how to predict when there's going to be a stable era. That it seems to be the goal of the game at some point. They like at first it's
But
like
you, but that's circular logic.
yes,
If the era is chaotic, then you can't. Then by definition, you can't predict when the era. Like, I mean, uh, I know only a little bit about chaotic systems in physics, but like usually once you get into a chaotic like part, you can't tell when you're going to get out of it. You can do a simulation, and you can discover that there are places where you enter into a non-chaotic part of phase space. But then you can, but like you, but unless you have all of the information that you need to simulate the whole system, which they must not have, otherwise it would be a trivial problem to solve. Then you can't really predict it if you're quote unquote inside this the thing, because when you're in the chaotic part of phase space, you can't predict where you're going to end up next. That's what chaos means.
yeah. I think the person that wrote it had that as kind of the idea where what's the real goal of the game? Everyone's trying to find a way in the game. They're all using these login names like Copernicus and Newton and Einstein and whatever. Uh,
That's very creative.
yeah, I know, right? And it's even more
Yeah.
ridiculous as the story progresses because you get to a point where it's like, oh yeah, all of these people that were playing were like, you know, basically of like academia or somewhere high in government or just high up places, inferring that
Sure.
like these are the only people that could possibly be interested in these kind of things. It's a it's a very weirdly written story. Kind of like half of it is the author poking fun at the CCP and the history of China, and the other half is him making sure he doesn't get shot in his home country.
Yeah.
Uh, he makes a lot of people out to be way more important than they are at some point, and it's just like that. These people are all kind of awful, actually. But
Well, yeah, they're part of the. Anyway, go ahead.
well, yeah, but so so all of these people are in this game trying to figure out how to predict a way where how to come up with a way where they can predict when a chaotic era will end and a stable era will begin and how long each will run for. And every time he enters this game for the first couple times, they always run across someone who thinks they have a solution, and it seems to work at first, and then something completely out of left field happens that throws everything off, and they're like, crap, it didn't work. So
Yes, this is a hallmark of chaotic systems.
yes. And it's really funny that you find out that it's a lot of scientists that are working on this at some point, which is I'm sneaking closer to the whole thing about the bloop.
Okay.
But this Professor Wong enters the game, uh, pays close attention to things that are happening that nobody else is paying attention to. Which, again, when you find out they're scientists, you're like, how did they not see this?
Yeah.
Like he's looking at the star. There's basically they come to a point where he is looking up at the sky and saying, okay, so we know that when one star appears and it appears in this manner, that we probably have a stable era or at least a chaotic era that isn't too tumultuous. And then when two
Okay.
stars appear, that's terrible. Uh, and well, they were calling them lights, I think. I don't think they were calling them stars, but they were basically stars.
Okay, fine.
And then they come up with, all these rules for what to do when there's one star and when there's two stars, and people are working out mathematical models to try and predict when there'll be two stars, and, why does the planet get cold? Why does it get hot? And why do certain eras not retain information? It's
Okay.
part of the game system where the world ends several times, but some of the information is retained, and the players, of course, remember what happened, and so they come back and they're trying to solve it with the new information. And
Okay.
he eventually realizes that, oh, there's actually a third star, and you can't see it because of the other stars, and it's creating, which this is the part that absolutely drove me nuts. It was called Three Body. The game itself was called Three Body. And it's
Yes.
creating a three-body system where all three stars are just completely out of whack, and there's no real way to tell when there will be a normal, just like day and night cycle, or at least like a predictable cycle, or when three stars will have some kind of formation that just completely annihilates life on the planet. Uh,
Okay.
and the point of the game players being able to dehydrate and come back at a later time is that
Uh huh.
this is how they survive the really chaotic times. They entomb themselves, and there's an emperor that stays inside the tomb, and when they believe they have a stable era, they rehydrate everyone. So at the end
Okay.
of the first part, this Professor Wong, they're basically going to burn his body. I've used basically like 1,000 times now. Forgive me, I'm tired. They're going to burn his body and remove him from the game. There's like this rule that if the Emperor decides that he doesn't like the idea you've come up with, they just they burn your in-game body and you can't log in anymore. And it's got like a retinal thing. That's why it's a VR thing, so you can't play it anymore. And he kind of wants to keep
Okay.
seeing what's going on, so he's trying to plead with them this idea that no, there's three stars that have a chaotic system, and so we can't really predict in this way that we're going to know what's happening. And just as he starts to burn, he's told by someone that the game actually rewards people when they're on the right track. And when it looks like when it finally looks like nope, he's wrong, uh, it's revealed. The game just suddenly ends, and it says, congratulations, someone has solved the first part of the three body game. The next civilization era will start with uh, a new goal or something.
Okay.
So he gets through that, realizes that he was the one to solve it after playing it like 3 times when people have apparently been playing it for years. And then the game starts again. And when they started again, I should say that I think after this, he goes and visits the old woman that had. It wasn't her that gave him the information to stop playing. Okay. Actually, I'm a bit confused here. I can't remember if it was the old woman that suggested he stop his experiment. It might have been her daughter. There was some confusing stuff that happened in the book at that point where I just wasn't paying attention. But basically,
Okay.
basically, uh, he
It doesn't sound. Yeah. Okay. Go
so
ahead.
he goes and talks to her, and she's telling him about working at this station where
Yes.
she had been told when she was taken there after being a prisoner she was probably going to spend the rest of her life there because she was considered an enemy of the people or something similar.
Okay.
But they needed her to do the things that only she could do, the astrophysics things. And that part
Okay.
of the story ends with her telling him that they'd been listening for alien life, and in the end, they all realized that there was no life out there and that they were all alone. So,
In reality or in the game?
in reality, this is all happening in
Okay.
reality.
But
They get back to the
but
game later
no,
on.
but you can't prove a negative like that.
it wasn't that they proved a negative. It was that they all had spent so much time listening for it that they basically lost faith that they were going to find anything, and they were just like, we're
Okay,
they were
fine.
like, we're pretty much alone. I almost said basically again there.
Yeah.
um, so that's a whole episode in itself when he goes and talks to her because she recounts her story of things that happened while she was on that base. And that's when you start to find out certain things like, you know, she knew all these people that were at this base and she doesn't want to go and visit their graves or anything. And you know, you're kind of getting the impression like there's sci-fi stuff somewhere happening in this story. And you know that there's got to be something with aliens based on the way everything is presented. But then they
I
outright tell
guess.
you there's no aliens.
Okay, fine. What I mean, what I
Are you starting to see just how convoluted this all is and how much it's just like everything is piecemealed together, these separate
it's not just
stories that
it's not just that it's convoluted. It's that like there's been no hook at any point that makes me interested in anything that these characters do or say.
I know, right?
Like 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 they're doing things that no normal person would do. Like someone made a game called Three Body. Okay, everything's chaotic in it. Okay, the point is to find a solution to when it won't be chaotic. Okay, why would I do that within the world of the game? Why would I bother?
That's the most frustrating thing I think about the whole story is like why the game was there to begin with.
Well, the game can be there. It can be that someone made a puzzle box for people to play with. That's fine. But like, I wouldn't I wouldn't subject myself to the environment, the chaotic environment. I would just, basically start grabbing variable dumps out of the game and then start making models or simulations based on that.
Well,
Like, there's no reason. There's no reason for this to be a VR game. Like, this could be a game of, like that. What was that? What's that game where like each pixel is like has the opportunity to the game of life, right? The little game
yeah.
of where like different pixels, depending on how many pixels are next to a given pixel, determines whether it's alive or dead the next cycle. Like you don't like. There's no reason to put yourself into a VR version of that game of life. You don't, because there's a better way to display that information.
It just gets funnier with the VR thing because
Well, the other thing is stupid.
it is, and it only gets stupider when you find out its purpose. You want to just know the
Oh
purpose now? I'll just tell
God.
you the purpose.
Sure, tell me the purpose.
It's a recruitment tool.
I mean, I could have guessed that.
It's a
In
recruitment
fact,
tool.
I was
Specifically,
guessing that. But okay, fine.
but it's not like what's that movie called? Not Star Wars, uh, The Last Starfighter. It's not that kind
The
of
Last Starfighter.
recruitment tool.
Yeah. Okay.
It's the type of recruitment tool where they assume that everyone that would be interested in playing this game would be very, very similar in their mindset. And
Okay.
I don't know if I want to argue against that because you would have to like very, very boring and pointless things that, as you mentioned, you could do outside the game.
So they were looking for idiot savants.
Yes, that is probably the best way to put it, except they didn't know they were looking for idiot savants.
No, they just created a system that would only
It
gather
would filter idiot
and
savants
bring
to
out.
them.
Yes.
So yeah, so it's like you're right about there not being too many hooks. Like the only hook up until that point, because they've given you at this point no inkling that anything with aliens is happening at this base that this woman has gone to, where you clearly expect things like this to be happening.
Sure.
And they've given you nothing in the game that you couldn't have predicted by the fact that it was called Three Body, if you knew anything about the three body problem.
Well, but three body problems aren't necessarily chaotic. They're just not analytic. That's not the same thing.
Yeah, but that's the point they were making, because they actually go through later in the book where they're talking to someone who is really good at analyzing the three body problem and has several stable outputs for it that he comes up with.
The three body problem is a stable output problem.
Oh, yeah,
the solar system.
That's what they're that's what they get into. The guy that writes the book really wants to show that he understands the topic.
Does he?
He does. He just
Because
doesn't.
that's not what chaos is.
He's not calling the three body problem chaos. What he's doing is he's presenting the parts of it that are chaotic as a puzzle for people to work out in terms of something that's happening in physical reality,
But
which we
no
haven't
part
gotten
of
to
the
yet.
three body problem is required to be chaotic.
No, it's not. They again they go through several different people who are just obsessed with the three body problem. Again, idiot savants.
But
Uh,
but this is what numerical solutions are for.
yes,
I mean, this is how you just because a problem is not analytically solvable doesn't mean that it's not numerically solvable or solvable or has meaningful solutions. I mean, I wrote a paper on
Well, do you want me to jump ahead to the three body part of it so that we can kind
I
of?
don't know. I don't know what I'm supposed to be thinking about, because this is just like someone's naming something and then putting chaos in there when chaos doesn't belong in there. Chaos is a completely different thing. That
It's
I
not
don't
that
know.
it. So an important part of the story, I guess, is not that he's calling it chaotic. It's the important part is that. Okay, let's get to the aliens. We're going to jump ahead just a bit. Actually, we don't even have to jump
Oh,
ahead just a bit because the second part of the game, it seems like they're going to keep going on with these puzzles uh,
yeah.
as as they progress, and then very quickly, probably in another full episode, they go through the second part of the game to a point at which there's a moon in the sky, and it turns out that the moon is something that was like ripped off of the planet in an earlier era, because the progression of the game is one of, all right, this civilization made it to this level of technology, but then we're destroyed by a sun burning too close to the surface of the world and scorching the surface, which
Okay.
was another thing that, okay, so like the whole description of this virtual world is that uh, people and things can be dehydrated and stored, and but then like
Why this focus on dehydration?
probably because that was the only way this story would work. To be
Okay.
totally honest, it's really funny. We'll get into that whole
But
process in a.
it's a virtual world. Just say suspended animation. Like, what the hell?
There's a reason for that. I can't get to
Okay,
that yet because
fine.
it's not as funny if I do it right away.
Okay.
So they get to the end of the second part really quickly, and they just kind of end it abruptly because the game basically announces, pretty basically upfront basic. Uh, the game announces that the servers have been compromised and the everything will be shut down. Just enjoy everything for the time being. And there's a guy who's representing Einstein on the server at this point, and he's doodling around, playing with a violin and talking about how, oh, actually, God does gamble with the universe. I'm wrong about everything. Yada yada yada. We can't figure this out. There's no hope, and the only hope is to leave this world.
This virtual world
Yes, but
that someone programmed.
it's like an in-game character that's basically that's pretty much saying that the result of the game is that leaving is the only option.
But I okay, fine. I mean, like,
And they're
I
specifically
assume that
using.
they have to be leave. I assume they have to be leaving the game to like eat and sleep and stuff like that.
Well, not everyone in the game is a real person, but yes, this is all happening over. So, so when someone thinks they've solved the problem, like they go through, they go through an entire portion of the game where they design a computer using people in the game. They go to this emperor in the game, say we need 31 million people, and someone in the game shows them how they can make a computer system out of people in the game by having one person be an input, one person be an output. They go through and or and NAND gates. Uh, for
This sounds like it'll work.
well, they do this and they get like 31 million people, I think was the number, to be able to do this. They have some bug issues which they solve by killing people that don't do things right. Uh,
People or NPCs or Like
Probably,
what?
probably NPCs in the game. It's supposed to be the
Okay,
Emperor's
fine.
army in the game, and he's devoting tons of resources to this, and he's making it very clear that if they can't give him results this way, that he's going to be chopping heads off. And in this
In
one,
this
they
game.
come up with an idea of making a computer out of people so that they can perform calculations to try and predict when the next stable cycle will be. And every single time, as in the first part of the game, they
Yeah.
they screw it up. They think they've got it, and then something comes out of left field and changes a single variable, and everyone has to quickly dehydrate, and it usually turns out most of them burn, and then the game has to start a new civilization. But the game progresses by saying this civilization made it this far, this one made it this far, this one made it this far. Some of them make it further, some of them don't make it as far, and it just goes on and on ad infinitum.
This sounds wow. So I'm just reminded of that old Flash game, Quap.
Yes, this is like this is very much like quapping your way through the three body
And like and
problems.
like and like and like you know how in Quap when you get to 50 meters, like suddenly there's a single lone hurdle in the middle of the walkway. It's just like hell.
The worst part about it is that all of the people that are playing the game are role playing too. So they're like role playing the characters that they're in the game
You
as.
can't get people to role play in real life.
That's
I can't believe a fictional world where they have people role play.
scientists role playing as they're talking about scientific principles and computers and and in OR gates. And the only one who's not doing this role play is Professor Wong. He's like in there under the
Okay,
name Copernicus, but he's just Professor Wong. That's how he's acting, just as himself. So like nobody else,
sure.
nobody else is anchored in reality in any part of this. Uh, but this is the part of the story where they finally, and I swear to God, this must have been like almost 4/6 of the way through the story. They finally get to where the people that were playing the game attend a meeting, and the meeting reveals that there actually is a planet like this with life that can dehydrate itself just like this, and they can't figure out a way to predict the eras that will be stable so that they can progress their technology beyond what they could just based on how long each era is going to last. Putting
Okay.
aside all the problems of a world that is constantly being flash fried or frozen, and relying on people to live in tombs for centuries, and families of emperors to just basically live out these long periods of time and over generations, and then rehydrate
Why is
people when
anyone
they
playing this game?
what?
Why is anyone playing this game?
Because if they don't play the game, then they can't relate the game to the real life thing that's happening that's much more interesting than the game, even if the world is silly. And the game was just totally unnecessary. Throughout the entirety of
Yeah,
this
it
book,
sounds like
this
it.
game is totally unnecessary. And I almost feel like the reason it was unnecessary was because at some point they have to have aliens. But they
Well, they don't have to have aliens. They could do all kinds of different things, but
No, no,
they,
no, no, no.
I
It's
mean,
it's a budget thing. It's at some point they're going to have to show you
budget.
aliens that are different than people. Although I suspect the Netflix adaptation is going to be like, oh, that's weird. They're just like us. But they never actually describe the aliens in this book, which leads me to the conclusion that it was written with the intention of, well, they might want to just use regular people and not have the budget for aliens. Again, this is the most written for Netflix book I have
Well,
ever read.
but
But the
look, I
entire
mean, no, hold on. If the person wrote the book and described the aliens, and then later got picked up for Netflix, they could change what the aliens look like for Netflix.
they
There's
they
no
could.
reason why.
They could, or he could just
Like,
write
there's
it for
no.
Netflix right up front.
But but now he has a major plot factor that is not described.
Maybe there's a second book. We don't know if it's not described yet. What we do know is that he didn't
Do
describe.
the aliens appear in the book?
They do appear in the book.
Are they described in the book?
No, because you're getting the information about what happened in their world secondhand from these letters that never actually describe the aliens themselves. They specifically point this out in the book that this information didn't describe the aliens, but we get the impression that they might have had like two eyes or something, or they might have been somewhat similar to humans just based on, the actions they took.
Okay.
Very, very, very written for Netflix. So they the VR thing, what I think is going on there is that just in case they want to have aliens that look different from humans, they don't have to.
They could meet in the VR world.
Well, they can have the VR world to set up what's going on in the alien world using actual people so that they don't have to spend as much when they get to the actual aliens. I, honest to God,
Yes.
think that was a forethought that the person that wrote the book had because he was specifically writing it to get a Netflix adaptation.
Huh.
I can't think of any other reason for the VR game in the game because there are interesting things that are happening in the book. It's just that they did not need to be dragged out this long to tell you what they were. This
Yeah.
could have been a Philip K. Dick short story with the information that you're going to get for the end of it.
Okay. It makes me sad. It makes me sad that because you could make a really good short story or a novella about, and it sounds like it just got fluffed.
They spent so much time talking about the and or gates. So much time. I think whoever
Well,
wrote it doesn't
you
understand.
could do that, but you'd have to make it interesting.
It wasn't very interesting. It's like I get it. You're doing gate logic. Anyone who doesn't understand gate logic probably isn't going to pick it up just on the explanation you're giving. We can move on, but it just kept going
How
and going.
how hard is it? Well, no. I mean, you could literally what? How do you screw up gate logic as an explanation?
By taking too
It's a
long, for
book.
one.
Well, yeah, but like you just have someone. Here's how here. Okay, here's the way that you describe a gate. In a piece of fiction, you have a character draw a truth table on the wall, and then you put that in the book.
What they did was not, it's not that they did a horrendous job of describing the gate logic. They had three soldiers. Two of them were called input, one of them was called output, and they went through the rules of if both soldiers raise a black flag, then the output raises black. If it raises anything else, if the two soldiers raise if one of them raises a white flag at all in any way, if there's not two black flags, then all the outputs should be white. Should only be black if all of the inputs are black, and that was the AND gate.
But this is. I mean, why would you? But okay.
But I think they took
one
like
of the
5 pages to describe that.
No. But okay. But now they're describing it as a three-state system.
Yes.
Because you could have black flag, white flag, or no flag.
Well, no, they made it a rule that it had to be flags raised. That was part of the rule. They designed it that way, but that's not what the rules that they said. They said it'll all depend on flags being raised. So like, there's no action taken until flags are raised.
But that's not. But that doesn't. That's not. But I can visualize a person not holding up a flag.
Yes.
And that's what makes this complicated.
Okay, so to be fair, part of what they were trying to do was walk through how this alien civilization is trying to solve these problems when it knows that, the world could end tomorrow and they could all have to like really quickly run and rehydrate or dehydrate.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
They're describing like how can they set up a system to calculate things. They're kind of showing through the VR world what this alien world had to go through to try and progress their science. Which,
okay,
again, becomes a very laughable thing at the end, because towards the end of the story, when you start to get a glimpse of what's going on in this alien world, you discover that they're actually much more advanced than humans are right now, which means that in this particular
that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, this particular era where they just so happen to contact another life form and find a planet that is stable, that was the particular era where they happened to advance the most.
But advancing the... But advancing... Okay, fine. It doesn't make sense, but fine.
And there's another thing that makes sense. The aliens themselves, in the messages they sent to Earth, they describe how they feel that Earthlings make huge advances very quickly because they go through Earth's history and like, yeah, from this period to this period, it's like you were cavemen, and then you had fire and were for such a long time it was like nothing really changed, and then uh, you started to hit industrialization, and then industrialization very quickly moved on to the nuclear age, and that very quickly moved on to an information age, and they're just like these if if we don't act now and get to their planet and conquer it, by the time we are forced to act, they'll probably be more advanced than we could possibly imagine. But the funny thing about that is
Uh-huh.
they point out that the aliens have a retentive memory because the way they breed is that two of them will merge and they will split into like five smaller children who retain some of the memories of the parents. So they actually have a long running remembrance of their own civilizational history despite the fact.
So they have genetic memories.
Yeah,
You're
yeah, they
saying,
have genetic
basically.
memory.
Okay, weird,
So
but okay.
very weird, but these are fruit roll-up aliens. So uh, now here's where I start to really kind of laugh at the writer's idea of how science works.
Uh-huh.
And this is spoiling the end of the book. There are several times in the book where they go back and forth uh, between a couple of main characters and their histories and people they met, most of which doesn't matter. Like almost everything about the characters' histories doesn't matter. The one character that they followed at the beginning of the book and then they went back to and she told her story to the one guy, well, you find out she's the one that's the commander of the Twilight Frontier, and uh, the Twilight Frontier had been split into factions, and she had been operating. What's a good way to put this? So there was a group that just wanted to end humanity and thought that the aliens were the way to do that, which they're correct about. The aliens do want to wipe out humanity and take over the world. There was another group that treated the aliens as basically a religion, basically, and
Mm-hmm.
they uh, they were hoping that the aliens would come to redeem humanity, and maybe like there would be some kind of annihilation of evils in humanity, and then they could,
Like a rapture
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
thing.
something like that. And it
They,
actually,
but hold on. They already have messages from the aliens declaring that the aliens are hostile.
no, they do not have that yet. That's what I was getting to.
Oh.
Uh,
Huh. Okay.
so at this point, what you have found out is that the woman that said that they had given up on finding life had actually gotten a message, or had actually discovered life in the universe. She found a way to use the sun to transmit radio waves that could be broadcast for the entire galaxy to pick up. And this alien civilization had one person listening that caught this and sent a message back saying, I've got your message. I'm surprised to find life in the universe. I am a pacifist from my world. Do not answer. Under any circumstances, do not send another signal. Your world will be conquered. Be thankful
Uh
that
huh.
I'm the one that found this.
Yes.
And this woman, who her father was killed at the beginning of the book, uh, and she had been, uh, she'd been living under that her whole life and had been treated as a second class citizen and was now a prisoner,
Uh huh.
decided that she was just fed up with humanity. So she sent another message telling the aliens that uh, she would be more than happy to help them conquer the world. And
Okay.
then she walks away from it and is just like, yep, I just ended humanity and good.
Someday.
And so this was the woman that had been talking to Professor Wong. So now they tie the two characters in after giving them both a horrendously long backstory, most of which could have been summed up in a couple pages.
Uh huh.
They even met a bunch of characters that didn't matter in the story. Other than
Well, that's always a good thing to throw in there. A bunch of stuff that doesn't matter.
they spent a very long time talking about one character in particular whose only point in the story was to demonstrate that there was a guy who had been the cause of the two factions splitting within the Twilight Frontier.
Well, I
But he had
fine,
his
I
own
guess.
background and like his own little part of the story, and he commits a murder and all these other things, and he really didn't matter other than, oh yeah, this guy was getting people to split into factions, which you didn't even need that information. The book could have just told you, yeah,
You don't even need the guy. Factionalism is something people do all the time.
yeah. I mean, really, the factions themselves, they matter, but they mattered so little to the underlying part of the story that the book could have just told you, yeah, there were two factions within this faction, and one of them wants to end humanity.
Yeah.
So another episode or two on the Netflix series would undoubtedly be the part where the general and the guy from the CIA and from NATO and Detective Gumshoe and Professor Wong all meet up again now that they know that uh, there's this alien invasion that's going to happen, and they find out from they've arrested the old woman that sent the message, and
Hmm.
they find out from her that there were things that were being kept from her that she doesn't know about, and they're all stored on this ship that was being used to receive messages from the aliens that only her and the people in the Twilight Frontier really knew about.
Okay.
And she doesn't know what's on those messages, and they're worried that they can't get onto the boat and get the messages to get the information they need to maybe stop this invasion without someone
But
destroying that data. The data is being kept there, but the Twilight Frontier is, they'll destroy the data if they think that it's going to be captured, but it's useful to them, I guess.
but the data doesn't do anything about the actual invasion. The data just tells that there's going to be one that they already apparently
Well,
know.
they only really know that the aliens are coming. They don't
Yeah,
know
but they're coming. But okay,
they
fine.
don't know anything about, they don't have any information on what the aliens are. They don't have any information on what technology they might have given to the Twilight Frontier, because a lot of that was being kept from that woman as well. And so they have to come up with a plan to get this uh, to get on this ship and get this information, and they're coming up with all these different ways. And this is
So now it's a heist.
it's kind of a heist thing, and that's why this
Ugh.
is where the detective shoe guy comes in, and in the only real genuine hook of the story, which actually has little to do with the rest of the story other than they accomplished this mission. They're all sitting around the table with these military generals, the CIA, NATO, scientists, and this detective is the one guy in the room that everyone's kind of looking down on. And they're
Hmm.
trying to come up with plans with like flashbangs or gas or radiation, all these things they can do to kill everyone on the boat so that they can't destroy the information before they can receive it.
Right.
And after going through several plans and the detective making fun of all of them, they finally get angry with him and tell him, like what do you know? And he goes, I've been following criminals that come up with genius ways to steal things my entire life. And he tells them a couple stories about criminals that did crazy things to steal things. And he says,
Okay.
I think I have more of an education on how to do this than any of you. And they're still kind of looking down on him. And so like,
Yeah.
well, what would you do? And he starts like pulling cigars out of boxes and setting them up on the table, and they're all just watching. And this whole time he's had the attitude of like, hey, we can't solve this problem. Why are we even talking about it? We should just, just do whatever. And they think that he didn't have any real ideas. And so when they call him on
Uh
it,
huh.
he's just like, well, the professor there has been working on this nanomaterial. They presented it at the beginning of the book, and it's really a coincidence, quite the coincidence that he happens to be the one scientist that's there that has this nanomaterial. That part is a bit like, it's a stretch, but whatever. The plan is actually not a bad one, and it's interesting that they use that character to come up with it. He's the only
Uh huh.
character in the story that I feel like they gave any real personality to, because the rest of the
Uh huh.
characters really, really, really feel like that whole kind of insert yourself into these characters because they don't have much personality. Like they are
Uh huh.
scientists and things, but they're like Professor Wong has no real personality. I mean, I can't even I can't even come up with like a personality trait that he had in the book other than he just kept trying to solve these problems, but very stupid ways.
Likes to solve problems. Not very good at it.
Yeah, or very good at it, but we're not going to explain why he's very good at it. Like he just solved the problem of there being three suns by random observations. There wasn't any real detective work in this story, which is why I call it a typical
Okay.
Netflix detective story because they're solving all of these
Yeah.
mysteries, but there's no real solving of the mystery. It's just like, "Oh, we got it now."
Here it
Yep.
is. That's the
Yep,
answer.
that's the answer. But this detective comes up with a plan where they're going to take the nanomaterial and they're just going to make a
Yeah.
net over through the Panama Canal where this boat has already, you know, they think that they're safe. The people
Past.
on the boat don't realize that, there's that many people that know what they're doing on that boat. So they're going to pass through the Panama
Okay.
Canal. They're going to have these pillars with the nanomaterial wrapped around them so that the nano strings can hold on to that without cutting through the pillars. And they're just going to let the boat sail through this material that will just slice through it like butter and kill everyone on board. And then they'll try and recover the hard drives.
What?
Yeah, they just have this material just completely coincidentally that is.
And what is the first off? That's going to sink the boat.
Yes, they account for that. They just say our only real chance is, we'll just salvage what we can. We'll try to dig through and hope that the hard drives survive, or whatever the information's on, and that's how we'll do it. But they need to kill everyone on.
This is a crappy plan.
Well, they need to kill everyone on the boat simultaneously because they are worried that someone will just put a bullet in a hard drive so that they can never recover this information. And
Yeah, but now they're just gonna run the hard drive across a piece of monomolecular wire saw.
they make the argument in the book that even if they're making a net that they feel is big enough to where it will cut up the people, but it might miss a lot of the important stuff they want on the boat. And they make the case
But
one of the,
no, you're gonna dice this boat, and a piece of debris is gonna land on the hard drive, whether it gets cut up or not.
yeah, I know it's
I mean, this is idiotic. Like, no, there are ways to plan and execute an assassination of multiple people on a boat with minimum chance of people figuring out what's going on. There are weapons and tactics that you can use to do this. This is not, you wait for a changing of the guard. You attack it just before dawn when their alertness is lowest. I mean, okay, so let me put it this way. If they're convinced that there's a guy with a hammer poised to smash this hard drive at any second that something is funny happening, unless he happens to be right at the front of the boat, he's going to know something bad is happening before he gets cut up by the wire.
that's kind of
And so he can just smash the hard drive.
that's kind of how they presented it, which is like I want to give them this one just because.
I don't.
Well, okay, so here's why. They made it clear that they had this nanomaterial, which was obviously going to be used somewhere. And all they really wanted to do with this detective character, who doesn't really play much of a role in the story otherwise, other than to motivate
Uh-huh.
Professor Wong by making him angry all the time,
Uh-huh.
uh, they wanted just to show that he had been paying attention to everything all along, and he was aware of the nanomaterial and all these other variables, while everyone else was kind of just dicking around. And while the plan
Yeah, but so
itself,
what?
what
So what? What do I care if this guy was paying attention?
I honestly, I just think it's like the only character that actually did something and put any real thought into anything, even if it wasn't the best laid plan. It's I think that's all there was to it. It's just like this one character that was going to do a thing, and I'm gonna let them have that scene. That's basically it. I feel okay with this, even though I mean I've seen worse convoluted plans in better stories, basically. So
I guess.
so it's like they I can give them enough rope that I can say they had no real plan to do this. Nobody could come up with anything, and this one might have been a long shot too, but it was the only one where you could sit back and be like, all right, but how quickly will the person that's supposed to destroy the hard drive actually know that it's not just some kind of, because they actually do describe as the boat starts to break up that the wire quickly cut into the parts that are mechanical, and so parts of it just like grind and burst, and it would be shaking the whole thing, and you might not have time to hit something with a hammer if that's the case. I mean, personally, I would think that you would have a detonator on the thing, which I, I mean, I don't know. There's plenty of ways to automate that system. Uh, but the point is, they do a thing and they get the stuff, and this entire operation only exists so that they have an extra episode that they can fill on Netflix. They didn't need
Okay.
to do any of this. They just need to have information that they somehow managed to get, and they didn't need to do it in this stupid way. I agree with that part. But since
Well, I
they
mean,
really want,
it's fine to make it's fine to create an enigmatic organization that has information that you need.
yeah,
But like you could do way better than like we're gonna cut it up with a monomolecular wire saw and hope it doesn't break because they would never have thought of that.
well, they wouldn't have thought of that, but they would probably be
I
prepared
mean,
for it.
I mean, like, well, no, they would not be. But I mean, it's just we have a magic monomolecular wire saw that can cut through an entire ship. Yet there's a guy. I mean, do they know? Do they have any idea what happens when a ship goes down? Like, it's not like, oh no, it is sinking. Blub blub blub. It's not like a. It's not like like an easy thing. Like stuff falls over and like the boat like will go on its side or tip over or flip over and like anything that is not nailed down, which is most things, will fly around and become damaged and things. It's just this just sounds like an idiotic
Sure,
plot
sure.
point that doesn't need to be there.
It's I only want to make the case in this particular part of the book that they wanted to do some kind of thing where they have these characters get information, and I've seen it done dumber, and it allowed the detective to have some personality, which made him the best character in the book. That's as good as it gets.
Okay.
Just a heads up.
Fine.
I mean, he has another, he's like the character in the book that gets all the cool lines, and then you're just like, but what about everyone else? There's lots of characters in this book. Couldn't some of them be interesting?
Well, I mean, they should, but apparently they aren't.
No, they're really not. And now we've gotten to the aliens. They have gotten this information,
They now have information about the aliens.
and for some reason, this information, this is another part that completely blows my mind, but for some reason, the aliens, in their messages that they're sending to the people that they have been told will help them conquer the planet, which, big
Yeah.
red flag right there, I would think, but nonetheless, they decided to tell these people their entire history just so that the heroes of the story could get this information and look it over, because otherwise they've got nothing. So it was imperative that they got this information from the aliens in this roundabout way. Now, here's what they did with that.
Okay.
This was the grand plan that the aliens had. And if you think the boat thing was dumb,
Which I do.
you're this is how they capped off the book. Do you remember the thing
Okay,
about
go
the
for it.
numbers in the eyes?
Yes.
The aliens had received this message, were getting ready to find a way to... They had a fleet, they were going to leave their planet, which, if they had the fleet and they had all this advanced, like, micro-dimensional technology, or whatever they were calling it, I don't even remember. They were dealing with... they were dealing with folding dimensions, and their plan consisted of making sure, since it was going to take them a long time to get to Earth, that humanity would not be able to progress beyond their current level of technology. And the way they came up
Okay.
with to do that was to fold a massive supercomputer into a proton. They would unfold a proton to a different to like its seventh dimension level or something, and they would build a
Okay.
computer on its surface, and then they would refold it, send it to the Earth, and they would have like four of these things sent to Earth, which they would then be able to uh, what's the principle again where two particles will uh, their information will instantaneously change over any distance.
Oh, did they screw up entanglement
They
too?
totally that's it. They screwed up entanglement. Uh, they had a
Oh man, anyone with a fundamental understanding of Shannon entropy doesn't knows that you can't transmit information that way. This is
yeah,
dumb.
yeah, that's it's the single biggest flaw that they had with their plan, but it's not the dumbest thing that happened. Believe it or not,
What?
the dumbest thing is that the plan consisted of them sending the supercomputer to Earth to do two things.
Yeah.
The second of which they're
Chew bubblegum and
that might have been better, honestly.
okay. Yeah, go ahead.
The second of which, their ultimate plan, is to make it so that any type of information that humanity would be able to garner from a particle accelerator is completely screwed, so they cannot advance their technology past particle accelerators because they are getting the computer would actually
Par-
change
par- par-
what happened.
particle acceler I particle accelerators are not a source of advancing technology. They're a source of advancing understanding of the fundamental particles of the universe. That you, I mean,
Yeah, no, the aliens did not want humanity to be able to reach the level of technology where they could do things like they were doing, folding dimensions and unfolding dimensions from a single proton. So the plan was to make it
uh
so that this computer that they sent to Earth would
huh.
would just interfere with any information gathering. Their goal
Okay, that's sorcery, but
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah. Their goal was to screw science for the Earth.
But
That's
that's not
that's really
huh?
dumb, right? Like I'm not crazy and think.
That's extremely
Oh,
dumb.
okay. Now you want to hear the actual dumb part of the plan?
Oh God, go
We
ahead.
actually we have to jump back to when Professor
Huh?
Wong was first seeing the numbers, and he
Yeah.
talks to a friend of his who is like freaking out because all these scientists are committing suicide. And he gets
Yes.
Professor Wong to have some drinks and play pool with him. He's like, "All right, now let's move the
Yeah.
pool table over there. I want you to sink this shot." And he sinks the shot. And he's like, "Okay, now let's move the pool table over here and let's sink this shot." He sinks the shot.
Move the pool
Yes, they're
table.
moving the pool table. And he goes, "You see, we've moved them both in time and space, and we've gotten the same physical result, right?" And he's like, "Well, yeah, it doesn't matter too much. I mean, the frame of reference is the pool table. We're doing the same
Yeah.
thing no matter where we move it and no matter how much time is advanced." And he goes, "Okay, now
Sure.
imagine if you take a shot and the ball disappears or it shoots off into orbit or
In random
yes,
direction.
this or that or just crazy stuff happens or whatever." And when he gets done describing this, just completely apropos of nothing, Professor Wong makes the assumption and asks the question, "This is something that happened in reality, isn't it?" And his friend tells him yes. And it turns out that part of
Well.
the aliens' plan was to
Yeah.
use things like numbers appearing in front of the eyes of scientists and experiments going awry to, one, make people think there's some kind of crazy like religious thing going on and turn the world to religion to slow down scientific progress. Two,
Uh
and
huh.
here's the real
Uh huh.
kicker, make
Yeah.
scientists think science doesn't work.
Well, I mean, you could live in a world where the scientific method didn't work.
Yes, and this is the question that I want to ask you. This is the thing of all things in the story that I thought was dumber than anything else. I want to see if you agree with me.
Okay.
Scientists have been doing things on Earth using calculations and mathematics and various scientific, research for a
For a
for a
long
very
time.
long
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, specifically in particle accelerators, but also whenever trying to do any advanced research into things, crazy stuff starts happening. But it's
That's so vague,
but it's
though.
crazy stuff that like wasn't happening before. Like they had done similar experiments where the crazy stuff didn't happen, and all of a sudden crazy
Yeah.
stuff happens. What is the first reaction
Sure.
of scientists? Is it all of them killing themselves because they were treating science like a religion and they suddenly found that their worldview was shattered and so they were just like popping pills and dying in their sleep or offing themselves by jumping off of buildings or shooting themselves? Worldwide, just chaos everywhere in the world of science? Or does the scientist sit back and say, all right, why is that happening? Which which
Well, I
which one
mean,
of those two is more likely?
okay, so the first thing I would try is I would say let's try the same experiment on a smaller scale. Is there something going on where there's some kind of like, let's say, some kind of weird curvature of the of a space that we happen to be in right now? I mean, I would try repeating earlier experiments that had been well done. Like I'd probably give myself a little time on a Michelson Morley and do a little check in for that luminiferous ether. Uh, if things started doing weird things tomorrow, the answer would not be I'm going to kill myself. The answer would be, well, let's try to devise an experiment that still does work, or find out which subset of experiments don't work, or find out which subset of experiments do work. I mean, like, you know, the things still have to work reasonably well at some level in order for life to continue to exist, right? Like Newtonian physics of like particles and like Bernoulli's principle have to continue to work, otherwise our entire bodies cease to function.
Right. So we've gotten to the point of this. This is the only real thing I wanted to talk about, and we're already an hour and 22 minutes in. I don't know why I felt the need to tell you the rest of the story because this is it. This is ultimately what it comes down to. It,
Yeah.
it was not a it was a bit of a it was a bit of a slog getting through it, but it wasn't a horrible experience. I wouldn't even say that, I mean, if you want to read something like this, go ahead and read it. There's a lot of extra detail that
Sure.
could be cut, but it's not really a horrible book. But there was just so much in it that was so stupid. And when it got to the point where, like, I could kind of, because of the way that the story was presented, you could see where it was going, and you could predict that this was the plan of the aliens. But it was just so hard to believe that it was this bad of a plan. Uh,
I mean, it doesn't. I mean, like, it's just
like I
it's
think there were red herrings, but by the time they got to the red herrings, it's like, no, that's a red herring. It's so obvious that's a red herring that none of them mattered. And so there's just,
well, the whole thing of let's make science not work is just
yeah,
dumb.
no, no,
Like,
that's the thing though. It's like that part of it was dumb enough on its face. I was just writing that one off as, okay, well, it's someone writing a sci-fi story. I don't understand everything about science, and I write sci-fi stories, so that you're always going to end up writing dumb things when you don't know what you're talking about. I could at least give them that it was just a plan that the aliens had that might sound stupid but might be passable to someone who doesn't really understand the science. Even though most of the book was bent on over explaining a lot of the science to people. I, I could still let it
well,
pass, but the idea that
okay.
the immediate response of scientists worldwide to things going crazy with results in particle accelerators was mass suicide.
I mean,
I,
people don't even get the. Okay, let me just state this for the record. People don't even get the results from experiments in particle accelerators for sometimes up to a year or more after the experiments have been done.
right.
Right? There's this whole thing going on right now where we have we're slamming things together, and we don't know what we expect. And we know that we have to sift through a whole lot of bad data or like spurious detections of things, And so scientists right now are doing things where they have these data that are in blind boxes that they can't look at, so they have to design something to analyze the box without looking in the box. And so like, I mean, and like, I mean like, you're talking about something like, you're talking about breaking something like conservation of momentum. And breaking conservation of momentum is a big freaking deal. Because everything that allows us to continue to live depends on momentum being conserved.
I mean, it's even funnier that you bring that specific example up, because they took great pains to try and preserve a lot of scientific principle about how these aliens were traveling, a tenth of the speed of light, and sending out probes that could, get to Earth faster and things like that. Ludicrous amounts of detail that you didn't need for these things. But then it's like, we have a magic computer that can just disrupt all of...
And we fold it into a proton that somehow, without touching anything, causes every particle acceleration experiment to not work.
Well, the idea was that
billiard balls do
the
work.
idea was that it unfolded, and the artificial intelligence they had folded into the proton was able to move into and see everything about Earth without having to, it could just step in and out of the third dimension to observe things and throw off experiments, basically.
What?
Yeah, no, they created an all-seeing eye that that could to some degree interact with the physical world. I'm
like a Maxwell's demon kind of thing.
Yeah.
Just a retarded Maxwell's demon.
Oh God, how did the Maxwell's demon thing go? He was talking about the demon
Maxwell's
being
demon
in
being able to sort
particles. That was it.
Between two
doors.
Two door. Well, one door, but between two rooms, volumes. Yeah.
Yeah. It's actually a great way. It was a retarded Maxwell's demon.
It sounds like what it is. It's like you'd have some guy working in a cloud chamber and he just like sees something spiral off in the wrong direction. He'd be like, well, that's odd. And there's just like some guy with a red painted face and devil horns that just goes.
Yeah, and the worst part about it was I didn't even understand how they thought this was going to stop humanity from really progressing science, because they had to make the assumption that all real progress in science from that point on was going to be made in particle accelerators, because they did kind of point out that there were only a few particle accelerators on Earth now, and so if we can just cause those to all have bad results, then they won't be able to really progress anything, and it'll take them too long to build enough particle accelerators that we can't interact with to where they can get good results from things. Which, first off, what about every other area of science that humans could invest in to try and stop an alien invasion?
Yeah.
And then it was.
I mean,
there were other weird things. They were using the proton fold thing to they were trying to use the instant transmission of information that they were somehow getting out of this thing to also send messages to the group on Earth that they were sure was actually serious when they said they would help them invade.
Uh-huh. Well, I mean, they may be aliens, but that doesn't mean that they've ever interacted with liars before.
Fair enough. No, wait, no, not fair enough, because they did have the one guy that tried to keep the message from them that was telling Earth not to send any more messages or they'd be conquered. I guess that's just withholding information.
Withholding information is not the same as falsifying information.
Well, all right.
I don't know. I mean, first off, you can't transmit information that way through entanglement. So, but at least I don't know. I mean, I would have to actually read the book to see what the hell they were talking about. But like, there's no information transferred in a, and even if you could, the cost of transmitting that number of bits in particles, each one with some, direction that you need to measure its polarization against or something like that would be like imagine, if you will, a beam of highly charged particles plunging through the earth and burning a hole through anything it touches. I don't know. It sounds idiotic to me.
I think that okay, so two things about the person that wrote it. One, I think that they really think the way to do science fiction, which this just barely counts as science fiction because they talk about science a lot and it has aliens. That's the only two qualifications I can really see for this book. The rest of it is just people randomly solving problems because they happen to be in close proximity to the solutions.
People solving problems in stupid ways as well.
Yes, in stupid ways. Another thing is, I wonder if this is a person who, like, let's assume very generously that this is actually a scientist that wrote this book. I mean, it's clearly someone that's read a bit about science. Maybe they are an actual scientist and they just, like, went off the rails and were just like, yeah, I don't have to actually stick to reality, which is fine. That would be fine. But, like, did they do work on a particle accelerator and they, like, part of the experiment got messed up because of some outside thing that needed to be fixed, but his immediate reaction was, "Oh my God, science doesn't work." like that part of the book is just like, that's so wild that you would even think that would be the reaction of science. It's like the people that wrote The Big Bang Theory and thought that's what geniuses were like.
I mean, yeah. That I was gonna reference that earlier, but like, yeah, I didn't have a chance to. It's weird because, like, there was that paper that got published a while back where some guys crunched some data from some group in Italy published thing, and the abstract of the paper was probably not. Because the title was like something like, does data from blah 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 imply that such superluminal transmission of information, and then the abstract was probably not. And they're like, we measured this data and it looks like something might be going faster than the speed of light. And then later on it was like, oh, it was a loose cable.
Yeah, no, I actually remember that one because I think that was the one that one of our friends was like, no, they've shown that that they've got something faster than the speed of light. They're scientists, they know what they're doing, and it just drove me nuts. I was like, because I remember this was like 10 years ago or something, wasn't it? It was like a while ago.
Yeah, it was a while ago, but like the whole point was that the abstract of the paper was probably not.
But the way it was presented to people was completely the opposite.
Well, yeah, I guess
because people prefer to read a news article about a paper rather than the paper itself.
Well, but anyone in good faith writing an article on that piece of paper would have to say, by the way, the people that wrote this article, they made the abstract just the words probably not. So they're probably they're pretty convinced that there's something wrong on their end, and they're going to try to figure it out.
All right, so here's your problem with that.
This happens all the time.
Here's your problem with that. People in good faith.
I guess.
Do people that write these articles ever operate in good faith? I mean, the whole point of it is to be clickbait for the most part. That is the current model for all journalism, is just like, hey,
scientists don't respond well to clickbait.
Scientists don't, but I'm talking about just regular old Joes reading paper. They get an article that says, oh, they've discovered something faster than the speed of light. They're not going to go and read the paper to find out that it actually says, probably not really, or to even look further in it and be like, oh, it was a loose cable.
I guess. I don't know.
But that should be the first thing. Like
sad.
any time that something crazy happens like that.
Well, it's like someone telling me that they discovered a macroscopic violation of the second law of thermodynamics. It's like, okay, sure you did. Make sure all of your cables are connected.
Yeah, I remember that happening, and I had almost started arguing. I got to the point where I was just like, well, no, they'll probably find that like it was a vibration in a table, or there was a differentiation in temperature to account for it, or something. And then it ended up being even simpler. It was just a loose cable, but the person I was talking to was just like, well, no, these are scientists. They account for all those things. We had a conversation about this years ago where I told you that, and you and I was just like, yeah. So are you just omniscient and you know everything beforehand?
I believe that I remember my response as well. Let me see if I can simulate it. Fuck no.
Yeah, it was pretty close. It's just wild to me that, this isn't a person that was dumb either that I was talking to. It's just like it's the view of
Yeah,
science that people have, where it's more like a religion to a lot of people. Even people who are actually intelligent sometimes just look at.
there there are entire sections of errata in journals. People making mistakes, or people claiming that other people made mistakes, and people saying, well, no, maybe this isn't the mistake. This happens all the time in physics journals.
Yeah, but no, I mean, you basically know that you found something faster than the speed of light right away because you wouldn't have messed up setting up an experiment, and there's nothing that can go wrong. I mean, it's not like mechanical failure is a thing.
It's not like two clocks could be, not synchronized properly.
And I mean, remember, it's the physicists themselves that build all the parts that need to be engineered or mechanically. Dang, I forgot the word.
Well, we do build a lot of the parts, and that's part of the problem.
There could be that too, but it's like, but you also have like multiple people working on projects at a time. So
why exactly did you use 75,000 meters of BNC RG58 for this? Yeah, that's what we had laying around. I know how to make those connectors.
Oh my god. I just there's so much scientific illiteracy in the world, and this.
I wish I could just say more about like how badly engineered scientists' solutions to things are in general at first. Like we suck at building things. We know what we want to build. We have no idea how to build it, and so we do all kinds of crazy stuff. And people are like, why didn't you just do this? And we're like, that's a really good idea.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of problems like that I just, it's like a hobby of mine now where I just point this stuff out to people. I mean, I always bring up the example that I gave of like, 15 years ago now where I was telling people while I was in college that, planes will one day drop out of the sky because there's no longer a divide between, or there's too big of a divide between the people that are doing the mechanical part and the software part and the electrical part. And so
Maybe.
so like the division of labor is great, but like nobody knows how to interact with the other divisions properly anymore. It's not part of the training that people are getting in college. A lot of times they're trying to mix the training in a way in which you have, instead of having a really good engineer that's talking to a really good mechanical engineer, like a really good electrical engineer talking to a really good mechanical engineer, is replaced with an electrical engineer that also has some mechanical engineer training, but he's not really good at either of them, and he's the one doing everything. And that's a lot of the problem. It's a lot of the reason why things break more nowadays and why things are being produced cheaper, because they're just expected to break. And so it's easier to just bring the cost down than it is to retrain people.
I don't have this problem.
That's because you worked in a physics lab. You weren't working in like Lowe's.
I guess. I mean, I don't have problems with like things breaking all the
time.
Well,
I'm talking about things like the newer things get, the more you see quicker breakdown in. Well, okay, so like you remember that Carl Denninger article recently where he was talking about all of the humidifiers being made in the same factory, and so they all have the same problems?
I have not read that article.
Well,
no.
That's what he said, and he was definitely right, because I remember when I was looking for things to sell online back when I was still running my crappy little shop, I would look at where these things were being built, and it's like, oh, these are like 5 different brands all being built at the same factory. They're all built the same way, aren't they? And sure enough, they are. That's true for...
It's mostly just branding getting slapped on, yeah.
I mean, that's how everything works nowadays, and it's become blatantly more obvious since I made that discovery, because now you just like go online and look at the stuff people sell. Everyone is selling their own branded t-shirts and water bottles and keychain things, which I know is different from an actual, appliance, but still they're all getting them from the same places to sell. It's just part of how the machine works.
They might be. There's what happens is that there's like one factory in China that builds these things, and they Alibaba it out to everybody.
Yeah.
And there's enough middlemen in the situation that nobody figures out that they're buying the same things.
Yeah, and
But like you can find parts that are sourced in America or built in America or built in a different country or built. It's just that like no one who's putting together an Amazon store is going to take the time to figure that out.
well, I mean, kind of, maybe, but one of the things that you learn really quickly by trying to put together an Amazon store and selling these types of things is, I mean, you see that right away. Like right away, you see, oh, everyone's going to Alibaba. Oh, everyone is getting their stuff from these same places. Oh, the markups on these are
Yeah.
actually huge, and when the public discovers it, they're basically gonna. I'm using basically way too much today. Yeah,
Yes,
I
you are.
didn't get much sleep last night. Um, And you know, I had this story on my mind too. It was just driving me crazy that all these. I'm just sitting here thinking about a, a mass suicide of scientists all jumping off the same building at the same time with tears in their eyes because they're
And none of them hitting the ground in the same place.
yeah, except for the two that are quantumly entangled quantumly.
Well, no, they wouldn't hit in the same place. They would hit the same different places at the same time, or they'd sprawl out the same way, or something. You
Well, the
can't.
way this story describes it, it's almost
Entangling microscopic objects is extremely difficult, and it's extremely difficult to
the,
maintain it.
the way this story described it. You would almost picture that one person would be like inches from the cement right before they're about to hit, and then the other person would shoot off into space faster than the speed of light to make impact with the other end of whatever they hit at the same time as this person.
I don't know. I just don't know. You can't usually entangle positions of collisions. It's not an internal state.
I'm just making the reference that they were ignoring thermodynamics.
Well, you do usually ignore thermodynamics on the quantum level because thermodynamics is a macro
Oh, really? That has
phenomenon.
nothing to do with like if you were trying to send information with quantum entanglement, that wouldn't have anything to do with thermodynamics?
No, it
Oh,
wouldn't.
okay. I've learned something new today. Hooray. You know what I didn't learn though? I didn't learn
I,
at
I, I
all
mean,
why scientists would off themselves like this. I still don't understand that.
I mean, you could make a connection to thermodynamics maybe because what you can do is you can calculate based on the spacing between any two energy levels of a system. You can calculate the probability that the system thermally is excited into one state versus the other, and so you get an exponential. And but the thing about exponentials is that exponentials get very big very fast, and so like large energy shifts of discrete quantum energy levels almost never get thermally switched between. And so like you would consider um, the thermodynamic lifetime of like a microwave transition in an atom is like can be like hundreds of years, just because the thermodynamics work out that way. But like you would have to have some kind of I mean any quantum information transmission system would have to have error correction and things like that too already, and so you would just have to deal with that. But like no thermodynamics. I mean when you learn thermodynamics at a higher level, you start getting into like what's it called? You start getting into the actual like Boltzmann stuff where you have ensemble systems that you are looking at what is the most probable microstate or set of equivalent microstates for the system to be in, and that is how you do thermodynamics at the upper levels.
Okay. I'll if and when I decide to pursue physics a bit further, I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah, I mean, you start doing stuff with canonical ensembles, and gets it it
I've never actually
it makes
heard
a strange kind of
I've never
sense.
actually heard the term canonical ensembles before, so I'm like picturing it in my head, and all I can picture for you know for no reason at all is the Anvil chorus for some reason. I don't know why. No, no, not the Anvil. The
Uh,
one with the cannons, the 1812 overture.
yeah,
Yeah, it's just canonic. Uh, but yeah, that actually reminded me of something else that happened in the story, though. All of the over explanation that they give for all of the
uh huh,
scientific things happening in the story, and when they got to the part
yeah,
about the particles being aimed so precisely at Earth, it was brushed off with the comment of, wow, they actually were able to hit this planet from that far away so precisely with this single particle. They must have really great technology to do that. And then they just drop it from there. They never talk about that again.
What? But you, huh?
An entire book of over explanation of things that probably don't even work.
No. Okay, so you, I,
It was weird that they were
you
worried
wouldn't
about
be
the particle.
you wouldn't be dealing with a particle. You'd be dealing with a wave function, and you'd have to hope that it has a cross section. That I mean, when you're no, this is not. You can't transmit. Well, maybe you can, but it seems unlikely that you'd be able to transmit, say, something the size of a proton across, let's say, light years of distance without, like, what do you call it? The wave-like effects of the proton being a serious issue.
Yeah, they didn't even talk about the wave effects of anything. The only thing they mentioned was, they managed to hit Earth even through like any cosmic dust or anything. So they got that far, but that was it. They just dropped explaining anything after that. Nothing about how, any.
And why would you use protons when you could use an uncharged particle that would work way better?
I have no idea.
Because charged particles are vulnerable to variations in the electromagnetic field, whereas neutral particles
Well,
are
that's
not.
what I was going to ask you. Is like, wouldn't the light from any star that hits this proton affect its movement through space?
Very with a very very small probability.
Okay, I was thinking that might be an issue, but I wasn't sure.
I mean, it would certainly cause some kind of. It depends on a lot of factors, but like the answer is probably not. But like, I mean, there are cosmic rays all throughout empty space, and any one of those passing within some short distance of the proton would mess up its trajectory entirely, and you wouldn't be able to tell where those particles were from a distance.
I see. So yeah, so it's every bit as bad as I thought about the whole aiming for Earth thing. But that's yeah, they just
And I
brushed
mean,
it off.
you could get scattering off of a photon. It would depend. It would depend on like what the system. If it was just a single free proton that they were sending, you could get like an acousto-optic effect maybe. Or what's it?
I want to say
there's a lot of funny things.
I want to say that they might have described how they were delivering the proton a little better than I presented it in the book, but it was towards the end of the book, and I was laughing too hard at their plan to stop science at this point that I'm at work listening to it, so I'm only half paying attention to everything that's going on. They might have actually described something else being done with the proton before they sent it.
Yeah, but it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah. I'm trying to give the benefit of the doubt here for a book that's presenting itself as extremely hard science when their first act in the book is to have a bunch of scientists off themselves because they might have gotten a wrong reading.
Yeah.
Because that came very quick. Like as soon as they started Professor Wong's chapter, they were already talking about scientists having killed themselves.
Mass suicides of scientists. No explanation. They didn't write down in their lab books why they were committing suicide. Which is a failing on their part.
Well, it's even funnier than that because, like the guy at the pool table, the guy that was describing what happened, he knew it.
Can it possibly be funnier than that?
Yes, there was a guy who knew why the scientists were killing themselves. He like just outright told Professor Wong out of nowhere when everyone else was wondering why the scientists were killing themselves.
How did he know?
Because he was working with. He was a scientist working with some of the scientists that killed themselves, and he was like, "Yeah, they could."
And why didn't he kill himself?
Drinking. He was drinking himself into oblivion.
Okay.
And the revelation of this to Professor Wong also started to drive Professor Wong to drinking, but then he found that game, the three-body virtual game to find solace in.
Oh, sure. That makes
absolutely.
Perfect sense to me. I mean, yeah, totally. I feel like reading this book would cause me to become suicidal.
More likely than if you got a bad result in an experiment.
Yes, much more likely. Oh God, I've heard about this book and I've heard it's really good.
I
And
was
like,
very
this is
suspicious. It
just
was a Hugo Award
painful.
winner, and I've read several Hugo Award
Right.
winners, and let me tell you, very written for Netflix these days.
Ugh. Well, it's an old book, isn't it? It's been out
I
for
don't think
like
it's that
it's been
old.
out
I
for a
mean,
long
it's
ass
talking
time.
about virtual reality as if it's modern day. Let's have a look here. Just
Three Body Problem from Shijin Liu or Shijin Ken or Liu Ken. It was released book 1 of 4, and it was released in
yeah,
2016.
yeah. So
Okay, so it's
pretty
not
much
that old.
virtual reality time.
Uh huh.
It's so weird to me that it can be so full of scientific principles that the writer clearly understands, and yet have so many problems that I, as a non-scientist who just reads things on science on and off for fun and doesn't even really memorize anything, could look at and be like, what?
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like the person that wrote this knows more about science than I do.
Uh huh.
But I also feel like the person that wrote this doesn't understand how science fiction works because, again, I've written stuff that was technology that I wouldn't be able to explain in any real scientific term, and I know that the solution to that is explain enough to where it sounds feasible, but leave enough vague to where you don't have to deeply explain how and why it works so that people don't look at it and be like, well, this is just stupid.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know.
I mean,
Show me the 1-star reviews.
oh god, I didn't even
The
think of
poor.
that. Yeah, yeah, we may as well see if there's any funny 1-star reviews while we're here.
The poor narrative problem. Bad physics, bad facts. Not hard sci-fi, not entertaining or interesting, bad writing. Author does not know physicists. Should be called the 4-body problem.
That's
Not
actually
recommended.
true.
How did this win the Hugo Award? Attempts to be hard sci-fi but is lacking. Did I miss something or is this really just garbage? The aliens are coming. Now we are done, so now close this book and read something else. Too many F words and others. Interesting concept, terminally flawed execution. Too much theoretical mumbo jumbo. Fascism exposed well. Plot makes no sense. And have been perfectly willing to ignore for the sake of following a brilliant scientific concept displayed in fiction. This
this is wonderful.
The birth of modern multiverse science fantasy. At least they aren't trying to hide the fact that this is straight CCP propaganda. Seems like the model is reaching the end of its effective lifespan. Shall we build a new model? Nah, burn it all down. Netflix logo on cover. Childish writing, zero character development, boring. What the hell did I just read?
Wildly mediocre. How is this book so popular? Just not that good.
Yeah.
Downer. Hard
Downer.
science strikes out again.
Disappointing, boring, incomprehensible. Save yourself the frustration. Poorly written, shallow characters, superficial ideas.
Some of the most shallow
I can't
characters.
return this book. Oh shit! Oh god!
It's seriously some of the most shallow characters I have ever seen, and I'm including Bubblegum Crisis Tokyo 2040.
Yeah.
And it really saddens me that an anime made it that far down on the scale of, shallow characters.
Well, they had Yakuza connections, so.
How does this have 4.5 stars? Abysmal. A meandering mess. It is really... It's just all over the place for one thing, and it tries so hard to act like these characters are against the the evils of communism when they're all basically like fall in line communists.
Yeah. Revered by the sophist intelligentsia. While the broad premise was unique and had some elements that were worthwhile, in general it was a whitewashing of sins of the Chinese Communist Party and generally supportive of their soul-crushing regime. Further, the narrative failed to hold my attention through slow developing plot and relatively weak moment of wonder when the plot fully develops. One-dimensional garbage.
Oh yeah, I didn't even mention that. The story ends
Yeah.
on the note that these aliens are coming and basically they've stopped science from happening somehow, and humanity is just, well, what do we do now? And so you've got to go to the next book to find out what happens next, which I do not
Of
think I
course.
have the energy for.
Grease contaminated book and package. The package arrived giving off a strong odor of peppermint. When I opened it, I found about 1/3 of the book and much of the inside of the envelope covered with a greasy peppermint smelling ointment. The entire object was so smelly and oily that I stored it outside. I cannot imagine how this could have happened. It is almost as if someone intentionally sabotaged the package. I will certainly return it. Don't bother. Brilliant concept ruined by immature characters.
Yeah, that was definitely a thing too.
Characters uninteresting, one-dimensional, and not believably motivated.
I will say that the detective was believably motivated. He definitely had a chip on his shoulder about everyone else thinking they were better than him, and he made that
Yeah.
clear throughout the story. Every other character, totally worthless.
Too tedious to finish. Poorly written technobabble. Don't understand the rave reviews. Eons of video game tedium.
That describes the virtual reality world very well.
That's what he's talking about in the review.
It's about asking a foreign power to help make Earth great again.
Cannot access footnotes. The app will not let me progress beyond footnote number 41 unless I fill out a review.
There were
The only
footnotes?
reason I reviewed is... That's what this guy says.
I'm glad I did the audiobook version. Jeez.
If you like science or fiction, steer away. Way overhyped.
Do you think I should review it? Do you think I should just be like the most written for Netflix book ever?
You could. Oh, that's funny. Let's go to the 2
Oh,
stars.
you know what else was absolutely great? Like near the end of the book, when the aliens are trying to figure out a way to send their supercomputer to Earth, they go through a whole process of trying to build the computer and fold it within the proton, and they accidentally awaken a lower dimension intelligence that tries to fry their planet by creating a lens to focus the sun on their capital city, and they end up destroying it really quickly, but they they just kind of, the writer did this to kind of point out that there could be entire intelligences within the inner dimensions of even a single proton, and so these things are getting destroyed all the time. And that was the aliens' justification
Uh-huh.
for just destroying all life on Earth.
Uh-huh.
And it was so funny when it got to that point, because I was listening to this thinking to myself, I so badly want this story to focus on that civilization instead of this one right now.
Yeah.
Like, I was secretly hoping there would be a third alien race that would come in at some point just to maybe like a three body problem that they could present in the story that actually mattered.
Uh-huh.
Because that was it. The whole three body problem was just, oh, these suns are out of whack and we can't predict them and they might eat our planet at some point, so we have to leave our planet. That's the three body problem that we dealt with in the story.
Yeah.
I like the 1-star review that just says, seriously? And his review says the only reason to read this is to circle J with people on Reddit.
Oh, that's funny.
One person found this helpful.
Characters ignore physics fundamentals and poor character development. Characters are often treated as pawns in the plot. Things happen. X did this. Y did that. There are some exceptions, such as when Wang is wondering if he is sane. However, this is not the norm. Some things do not make sense, like an epidemic of suicide among theoretical physicists because the world ceases to obey theoretical physicists because the world ceases to obey known rules of physics. In the real world, they would be ecstatic. Finally, the main issue is the author's ignorance of basic laws of physics, such as when vast quantities of information are transmitted instantaneously using quantum entanglement. I'm a scientist but not a physicist. However, common knowledge that although entanglement is possible over very large distances, information cannot be transmitted. And it would be fine if the author acknowledges its limitation and mentions some new unknown physics that allows to bypass it, but he doesn't. Overall, if you are a scientist or engineer, you'll be disappointed at the author's lack of basic science knowledge. Wow.
So there it is. I am so glad that you thought to look at the 1-star reviews, because there's like this pit in my soul where it's just like, doesn't anyone see these books the way I see them? Why are these popular? But then you read the 1-star reviews and you're just like, oh, people get it. People actually do get it.
There are people who get it. There are people who aren't taken in by a Hugo Award winning recommendation.
Yeah, I have another Hugo Award winning novel that I just purchased it because the concept sounded cool, and I ignored the fact that it had the Hugo Award on the cover. I was like, I'll give it a chance. That Hugo Award is basically poison to me now. It was...
Yeah.
I started...
It's like the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah. You have to be the biggest monster to get it. It's just so horrible, though. Like, I picked up that book and I just started reading, and I got through 2 chapters. I was like, this is not going to go anywhere, and everywhere that it's gone so far is stupid.
Yeah. The dialogue reads like the voiceover from a Godzilla movie.
That's true.
The cover has a coming to Netflix advertisement that is not shown in your description of the product, and it makes the book cover look ugly. I bought the book. I don't care if there is a TV show, and I certainly didn't want permanent advertisements for that TV show on the cover of my book.
Do you think we'll ever have, like, another golden age of published writing that you can easily find on places like Amazon, or are we just relegated to indie stuff henceforth?
I mean, I don't know. Someday the indie stuff may make its own niche in the world.
Yeah, there's a lot of people.
There's
a lot of people trying. I mean, I used to rag on Stephen King novels because a lot of the times I felt like he didn't pay any attention to punctuation and grammar. But I'll take that over this stuff any day. I mean, I could sit down and read a Stephen King novel. This was just, if I had been reading this as a book and not listening to it, I would not have made it past the first 3 chapters.
Yeah, there's a lot of reviews that are saying that they got through like 20 pages or up to about a quarter, 20 to 100 pages, and then gave up because it was just too bad.
They spent so much time talking about the Cultural Revolution. Had nothing to do with the rest of the story.
And I bet that their discussion of it didn't include any of the stuff that you might find in like the Black Book of Communism.
Probably not. No, I can't really think of anything that jumped out at me.
Yeah, okay, good. Good to know.
Towards the end of it, they even had a sympathy moment for the revolutionaries, where they're like, yeah, but we were young and nobody told us that we would be, working in the fields and doing all this other stuff. And it's like, oh, shut up.
Dumb shits. Mises did it in 1920.